Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host 𝗝ci. Joining me today is Rami Niranjan Desai ji. Namaskar Rami ji, how are you?
Namaskar, how are you?
I'm doing well. Always a pleasure to have you on our platform. Always you bring some refreshing ideas and thoughts. So I'm just going to set the stage here for a very simple question. Viewers, Northeast India became converted to Christianity, practically almost all of it, barring a few states, Tripura and maybe Manipur, some parts. But the rest just got converted in the first 25 to 30 years of India getting its independence. Yet, today, if you look at it, Northeast is completely woven into the fabric of the greater India concept. How did this come about? Ramiji has some thoughts on this. This is going to be a fascinating talk. Please watch it till the end. Over to you, Ramiji, and also please like this video. Over to you.
Thank you, thank you. It's always a privilege to come on PGurus, because you ask questions that are they're so simple, but nobody ever asks them. These are our foundational questions. When we talk about a nation, we talk about a civilization. What does it really mean? And you're absolutely right in saying that it was post independence that the northeast region of was converted. Let me tell you, and let me give you a little background because you've been so kind to give me this time to speak, and I think
Yeah.
it does justice to the question that you've asked.
Yes.
The Northeast has always, and as many other tribal communities, the reason we say the Northeast, Northeast, Northeast now, and we don't say, we don't talk about any other region the way we talk about the Northeast is because, the Northeast is geographically cut the way it is. It's in a very precarious way. So psychologically, it makes it distant for us. Geographically, it makes it distant for us. But was it like this before? Surely it wasn't, because we've always been a great civilization, and the great civilization has extended beyond this region. You look at, for that matter, Burma or Myanmar, as it is called now, uh, in our language, it was called Brahmadesh. It was
Yes.
supposed to
Yes.
be the
Yes.
great country of Brahma. You look at the interconnectivity, you look at the empires, you look at the kingdoms, that have always transcended across these borders. Who brought these borders? It was finally, when the idea of nation came in, it was the British who carved out these borders, and badly so. None of these borders are good borders. And it's not just, on the northeastern side, northwestern side also, has been problematic. And across the world, wherever the British pulled borders, because they didn't understand old civilizations. Um, with the advent of colonialism, the Northeast was also very far away from them, we must remember. And by the time they won the Battle of Plassey and so on and so forth, they had got an idea of how difficult Indian society was to understand if you're not born in it. And it was post the Battle of Plassey that they set their eyes on the Northeast. And once they encountered, and I'll say this in very brief, once they encountered the Northeast, they realized that this is a tough, tough place. This is not like going into an urban center. Tribal loyalties, ethnic makeups, their administrative systems are very, very different. So, and again, like I said, I'm saying this in really short, I'm jumping a lot of things here. They sent the missionaries, and they sent the missionaries in a way to homogenize communities. In India and in our civilization, there is no such thing as homogenized like communities. We thrive in diversity, and diversity to anybody who is born of this culture comes very easily to us. We can go to a temple in South India and understand immediately what they're saying in whether it's the hymns or whether it's the way of worship or whether it's the rituals. The same way in the north, the same way in the west, the same way in the east. But for them to encounter tribal communities was, coming across communities that's completely uh, different. For them, they use the idea of civilized versus non-civilized, pagans versus non-pagans. And they thrust upon them this idea of tribal, which they later brought in the census. So, in the census, they had the freedom to divide our society the way they wanted to, as per their understanding. We never had that need. And therefore, they brought in the idea of animism, they brought in the idea of tribalism. Now, the minute you manufacture these terms and minimize the sophisticated cultural routings, moorings of these societies to something so basic as just a term, what you do is you make them look less civilized than yourselves. And once they made them look less civilized, is when they brought in, the missionaries saying that, oh, they will civilize them. It was a civilizing project. But let me also remind your audience that until 1947, the kind of dent that they could make was very, very minimal. Even up till 1971-72 in Arunachal Pradesh, the conversion rate was only point some 7% or something like that. It was very, very single numerical digit sort of conversion, the population that they had managed to convert. The same was even in Nagaland, which was, now 100% converted. But at that point, again, the conversion was very, very minimal. Right up to independence, it was only maybe 23, 24%, something like that. Even post independence, for the next decade or so, it remained very, very low. But this consistent ignorance by the governments at that time of what the Northeast was, what tribal communities were, because it was fairly an anglicized government. So for them, yeah, these are tribal communities, and the missionaries are doing something that we cannot. And we all know Nehru's tribal affairs advisor was very irrelevant, and he was a missionary. So obviously, the lens used was that. Now that became a problem to nation building, because we, stepped into this, idea of a nation. And I remember a very good, a very important line from Risley, the father of the census and of, he was heading Asiatic Society at that, Herbert Hope Risley. He wrote in his book, I'm forgetting the name of the book. He wrote in his book that one of the problems is that you can speak to a poor person, you can speak to an illiterate person in India, and they'll be able to really define what religion is for them, what faith is for them, what very complex systems like death and afterlife is for them. And this wasn't of the pagans who Christianity had conquered in the Roman Empire. And therefore, the chances are we won't be able to completely conquer them. Following that, there was a letter from a civil services officer who also says, look, we've reached the Northeast and they are really at a nascent stage of nationalism, nationhood, and they don't understand nations. So while we may not be able to impact the rest of Indian society, especially the upper classes who are very rooted in their culture, we must reach out to these people and we will be able to give them a different sense of nationhood, a different sense of community. Anyway, and I believe that is the premise that they started working on, that let's create these entities, let's create these groups that are loyal to us, our way of thinking, our faith. And that is why, if you notice, long story cut short, that we saw the kind of rise of separatism in the Northeast. Separatism. Now, here I don't say internal conflict, I don't say, sure, it was insurgency in a way, but this was secessionist thought. The longest running separatist movement in the country is from Nagaland. You also have the Mizo, you have many, many other conflicts. You have the Mizo National Front, uh, you have the uprisings of Ulfa, you have NLFT in Tripura. And I think that, that idea of we are a separate nation, we are a separate people, came from this, prolonged idea of that tribals are separate, that communities that are so geographically distant are separate, that if your culture is different, you're somehow civilizationally different. And I think that became a great challenge to us when we became a nation to integrate these areas. And I won't say, even like I told you before the show started, that even integration is a difficult word for me personally to use. And I don't care what academics say, I don't care what scholars say. I think it's literally reminding them of what their roots are. It's not integration, they are integrated already. It's that disconnect that's happened where they've forgotten. There's been a loss of, there's a civilizational memory loss that has had to be regained. They've had to be reminded that look, we've always been connected. Now, whether it is through the stories of the Mahabharata, whether it is through the stories of
Are
a
we
great.
talking about Syamantak Mani thing?
Um, I'm talking about. I'm talking about very very small connections. Like for example, the Tripuris. You mentioned Tripura earlier on. The Tripuris consider themselves as a direct lineage of Yayati.
Hmm.
The kings of Tripura, and they are tribals. The kingdom of Tripura, the king of Tripura, he is a tribal. He also has a political party now called the Tripura Motha. But they consider themselves direct descendants of Yayati. You go to, we all know the stories now. 15, 20 years ago, when I used to speak about it, people didn't know these stories. But now we all know that, you talk about Chitran Gada coming from
Yes.
about Hidimba from Nagaland, so on and so forth. Rukmani from Arunachal, you have the Parshuram Kund there, you have even the Chief Minister of Assam now saying that they're going to make an entire tour, a travel tourist map around the Mahabharata in Assam. You have Kamakhya Mataji there. You have Tripura Sundari in Tripura. So there have all been these connections there, but you also have the great sages like the great philosophers, thinkers like Sri Shankar Dev in Assam. So you've had these movements that have brought this memory back to the forefront. But this whole discussion came up because I wrote an article for the Open magazine on the role of the RSS in the Northeast. And I think these are very important elements for us to remember in the face of separatist movements where there are vested interests. And I'll again say this is not majority of the population. If you look at majority of the population, they very much feel a part of the greater civilizational narrative that is so embedded in us. But this is a few vested interests that whether it's international interference, whether it's they have personal gain in it, have created these separatist movements. And it's been created on the basis of subnationalism, saying that, oh, our language is different, our ethnicity is different, our religion is different. And religion has played a very big part. NLFT in Tripura, what was their foundation? Their foundation was that they're a Christian organization. What was NSCN? NSCN wanted a land which was Nagalim for Christ. It wasn't Nagalim for everybody. It wasn't a secular country. It was Nagalim for Christ. So for God's sake, we've got to start accepting that religion, was embedded into this region to create separate identities, to create separate territory if possible. Now comes the role in modern India of organizations, people. There were tribal uprisings against this sort of thing. There was tribal uprisings even in the time of the British advent into the Northeast. There was, there were Aka Khamti movements. There was so many other movements like this that fought alongside the rest of the country in, the freedom struggle that we wanted from the colonial British. But post-independence, also, there were movements. Now let's, talk about organizations like the RSS. Nationalism. When we talk about nationalism, is a very dirty word in the West.
Yes,
It's
indeed.
you said it yourself. It's equated
Yes.
so much so to fascism. In India, we have to understand that nationalism, nationhood, these are greatly revered words. These are revered words because who were our freedom fighters? They were our nationalists. They were our national freedom fighters. They were what we call, nationalists. So to be a nationalist in our country is to be a patriot, to be, a part of this whole the civilizational narrative that says that we belong to the same land. So for in our country, the idea of nation, idea of nationalism, nationhood, nationalist is very different from what it is to the West. So we must take away that stigma from it when we talk about it in the sense of India. Because if you don't understand India. You don't understand even modern, you know, modern India and modern narratives in India. So when the RSS was formed, it was again formed on the idea of Akhand Bharat, that there is a greater Bharat, there is India. What did the separatists want? They wanted, separate pieces of India. So this was a challenge. And this was a challenge that was now so deep rooted. It was, a century old in the Northeast. So for organizations to go in that sort of atmosphere, and, they started going in, right after independence. I started going in the 2000s for research. And even then, as somebody who, I wasn't political, but, came from the idea that the Northeast is very much a part of our country and, it's always been a part of our imagination. That even there, I countered challenges and I had to be very careful of what I said, who I said it to, where I went, what did I tell people, what my research was on. Even I had to be very careful. So when I think of it in that sense, that an organization had the foresight to go in at as early as the 50s, early 50s, in the 60s, it puts a shiver through my spine because you don't realize, they also had the stigma, unfortunately, which was obviously proved false later, of Nathuram Godse and Gandhi's assassination. So all of this put together, the atmosphere that they went in was very challenging, was not comfortable, was not accepting of them. I remember, an Irish old hand, an old pracharak telling me, he said, when one of the first times when we went into these remote areas, we didn't have food to eat because, they don't get, it's not like, they have money. These are people who really just believe in the idea of the nation and believe in unity. And therefore, they give their lives to the service of the nation. So when they went, they didn't have money. There was no infrastructure. So they were used to be invited to people's homes to have a meal, to chit chat with them. And that's where they would have discussions, vibrant discussions of nationalism, nation, what nation meant. And these are very intellectual discussions to have with the common man. And one of the gentlemen asked, he said, but what organization do you belong to after they're eaten? And he said, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. And they said, oh my God, you must leave, get out of my house because you're associated to, it's said that you're associated to Gandhi's assassination. That stigma, which was a false stigma, which was a narrated stigma, which was manipulated, took a very long time to erase. And it was only through one on one discussions, communications, exchange of ideas that the real essence of what they were doing there came to fore. And once that came to fore, and obviously, people believed in it. People people responded to the organization there that the idea of nationalism and nationhood started permeating. Now, alongside that, there were many mentee organizations that sprung up, whether it was Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram for the benefit of the tribals, whether it was students' organizations, whether it was programs. Let me tell you about one program which I found fascinating. Uh, what is a nation to a person who lives in a remote area who's never gotten out of his village? What does Kashmir to Kanyakumari mean to him? Does it mean anything? If you've not come out of your village, you've neither seen Kashmir, you've neither seen Kanyakumari, you've never seen the power center Delhi. What does it mean to you? Nothing. So a program on this premise was started, which basically said that look, we're going to take a bunch of children across the country to show them another city. What does, even for me as a young person, I started traveling very early and I started traveling to a lot of these remote areas, and therefore my sense of acceptance, my sense of culture really widened more than I can safely say more than that of my own friend circle. What happens when you travel? Your idea opens. What your nation has, it opens up. Your cultural diversity becomes more acceptable to you. It becomes enjoyable to you. Different food, different music, different ways of dressing, even behavior patterns. You start observing, and you start accepting people. And they started doing this. Now, of course, they don't have a lot of money, so it's difficult, to do this consistently. But I still remember a wonderful little story where, and I mentioned this in my article also, where many, many years ago, when I was in a remote place, and I went to one of these hostels where, they house young tribal children who want to preserve their indigenous faith. And mind you, this has nothing to do with being a practicing Hindu, but it has everything to do with giving you the tools to preserve your indigenous faith, because indigenous faiths are as important to India's cultural diversity as anything else. So there these all these kids from different indigenous faiths whose families had resisted conversion for and in lieu of inducement of money, and therefore they were given hostel accommodation where they could study because their villages didn't have any schools. And sometimes missionary schools can also be very overwhelming because they will only give you admission if you convert. So they were brought to these areas, and they were brought to these hostels, and they went on to really have like great the pass percentage and the quality of students that come out is really exceptional. So the principal there um, decided that she was from Pune, and that she was going to take these children to show them the sea, because they'd never seen the sea. And when I met these children, they were like, "Oh my God, we didn't realize our country was so big." Simple things like they sing the national anthem in the morning. Simple things like this instills that sense of unity and nationalism. So I think, to answer your question, I think, our country is absolutely different from any other country in the world. And therefore, other people find it so difficult to understand what we are all about. And I also do truly believe only if you're born in this civilization do you really understand the idea of what nationalism, nationhood means to us. And it means far beyond what the West defines it as. And it is in this diversity that we find a sense of unity. And that is why organizations, people who, very much like the RSS, who involve the various diverse factions of our country, end up becoming such huge organizations because it appeals to the common man's, sensitivities. And if you don't understand that, And if you don't understand it from really the inside, then you can't understand this country.
Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful stories, and this process is continuing. In fact, I think recently they saw broad gauge connectivity all the way to the very tip of the northeast section, and it's a sight to behold because this is just the entrance, the gateway to Southeast Asia, in a better climate. Hopefully soon, with people like you being actively involved, this is going to become a reality. You are going to see Airavati River, which is Iravadi today, Brahmadesha, and then beyond that, Champanagari and Kambuja Desa. I can go on. All these things had Sanskrit names at one point. Vijayapuri in the Indonesia is Vijayapuri, and so thank you so much, Ramiji. And as always, a pleasure to have you on our channel. Viewers, please do read this article. I'm going to give you a link to that. I don't think we touched upon all aspects, but it does, give you a spotlight on how somebody has taken it upon themselves to make sure that everybody feels we're all part of the same big family. Thank you so much, Ji. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you.